So greetings to everybody, a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. And as CSW comes to an end of a few busy weeks of sharing and advocating and working towards the future we dream of. And during this busy time, thank you for choosing to learn about the rights of older women, and specifically the right to economic security, our topic today. My name is Sharon Fisher. I'm the immediate past president of Soroptimist International, with clubs working in local communities in over 120 countries around the world. We're hosting this event today in partnership with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People. And as many of you know, I invited our global membership on the road to equality during my term to learn about issues that mattered. Each of 6 topics was accompanied by awareness, advocacy, and then action through a project on the ground. However, when we started seeking a project for the rights of older women, it was not an area that our membership had prioritized in our service work. Even the United Nations was not always counting women over a certain age in their data collection strategies. So my conclusion was that we seem to not be concerned, or we perhaps think older people, particularly women, are taken care of through the government or by families. And this is simply not the case. Nor are all older adults vulnerable and in need of care, since in many cases, they are the majority of our volunteer corps, and they are our caregivers with much to give. So I took my frustrations to Soroptimist International UN rep Frances Zanodine for a conversation, and she introduced me to the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People and their 2022 campaign, Age with Rights. It had become clear to me after all these years as a society and in community, we are still at the awareness stage of achieving the rights of older persons. We have used the Global Alliance 2022 campaign, Age with Rights, as our lead project for the road to equality on the topic of the rights of older women, so they can do their work, which has almost 400 member organizations, to advocate for a binding agreement, a UN convention for the rights of older persons. So the call to action today, with over 50 countries represented on this call, is to advocate with your member states, your elected representatives, and those you cross paths with every day that you want to age with rights. And to do so, we need a binding agreement, a convention, so it is more than just something the governments choose to do. The goal is to hold member states to account and create a world where they must consider the rights of older persons. And our panel today, we have 4 people to hear from, and all very interesting and very diverse. I'm going to introduce all 4 of them and then invite the first speaker. Ken Bluestone is from Age International. And Age International recently issued a report on older women, the hidden workforce. Ken leads Age International's policy influencing work in the UK and internationally on issues affecting older people in lower and middle income countries. Ken's remit includes government relations, parliamentary work, research, and building relationships with stakeholders who have a policy interest in agreeing and aging and international development. He's on the board of directors of Common Age and was previously chair of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, which is called GARAP. We're then going to hear from Neol Irena, who is from Rodrigues, Mauritius, which is on the east coast of Africa, I guess in the Indian Ocean. She is a youth advocate. We wanted to get an intergenerational look at this. She's a peer educator and a member of the African Youth and Adolescents Network in Rodrigues, and she was the lead person for the Commission of the Rights of Older People of Rodrigues. Then we're going to hear from someone who we consider a youth, but she's a little older than Neil, Ayushi, Kundu, and Bose. I hope I've got her name wrong. Ayushi, right? Her Ayushi got married 2 weeks ago. So this is a new name for her. So we're not used to pronouncing it. She is one of my partners in the Road to Equality Appeal. She comes from Calcutta, India. She has an LLM in human rights law from the Queen Mary University of London, where she studied human rights of women and international child law. She works as an advocate at the Calcutta High Court in India, where I think she's hanging out today. And Ayushi believes she can make a difference every single day by standing up for someone or helping support someone. And last but not least will be Amal Abu Rafa. She is the Chief of Program on Aging at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York, called UNDESA, if you've heard that term. And she serves on the Secretariat of the General Assembly's Working Group for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons. She has a long list of accomplishments, right back to her education at the American University of Beirut. She was born in Saudi Arabia. And I'd like to welcome our speakers. And we're going to start with Ken Bluestone. And Ken, you can bring up your slides and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Right, let me just start sharing my screen. Bear with me one moment, please. Right, can you see my slide?
You're good to go. You're good to go.
Wonderful, good. So first, let me just say thank you so much for the invitation to be here and how delighted we are to be a part of this webinar. It's also really great to see some familiar faces and names on the participant list. I do want to point out that I'm not the person that really should be here giving this presentation. It's my colleague Kate Horsted, who carried out the research, and indeed she prepared this presentation, but she was unable to join you. So I'm a poor stand-in, but hopefully I'll do as good a job as Kate. For those of you who are not familiar with Age International, we're a UK-based NGO. We work to strengthen the rights of older women and men, to improve their well-being and to help them have access to a decent income in low and middle income countries. We're the UK member of the Help Age International Global Network, and together we work in over 30 countries. We are also very proud to be one of the founding members of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GARAP. So bear with me one second. There we go. I just want to get rid of my face on the screen. My talk and the information I'm going to be sharing with you comes from findings from research that we did, as Sharon had mentioned, which is part of a wider body of work that we've been doing on older women's economic justice. We did this because we felt it was absolutely vital that we made visible the economic contributions of older women. Previous work was called Who Cares? Why Older Women's Economic Empowerment Matters for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll share links to both of these publications in the chat when I've finished speaking. But and with that previous work, we took a macro picture. We wanted to try to come up with some numbers. We worked with an organization called ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, that's really good at doing this stuff. And I'll share some of the statistics and the figures that came out from that. And we did this because one of the things that we were finding, in addition to actually the importance of valuing and making visible and recognizing just what is the huge contribution that older women are doing, we found that the international processes that on gender equality weren't doing it. So things like generation equality, even the Women's Economic Empowerment Summit, if they did mention older women, we would only recognize them as recipients of care, as opposed to the hugely valuable role that they play in society. So the first piece of work was trying to put some numbers on it, trying to paint a picture and to understand things. But we realized we had to take it a little bit further. We wanted to really understand from the perspectives of older women themselves, what is their experience of work? So older women, the hidden workforce, deepens our analysis of these wider qualitative and quantitative issues. And the work that we did, the research focused specifically on Ethiopia and Malawi, but of course we did some other wider research to make sure that the findings in those countries we could situate into a broader context. So while the specific examples I'm going to give are from those two countries, I feel confident that they represent a very much wider range of experience. And it was hugely valuable, important for us that we used through this qualitative research really brought to the fore the voices and gave older women themselves voice in this process. And indeed, when we went back to the communities with the initial findings of the research through our partners, many of the older women were absolutely shocked, first of all, that they were being asked for their opinion and being asked to kind of comment and to be, and that they were being recognized. And that process itself was hugely valuable. So from our research through the hidden workforce, but our previous analysis as well shows us that older women globally do on average 4.3 hours of unpaid care and household work per day. This is not work that we would consider necessarily to be easy work. It's often precarious work. It's informal work. The ILO says that in 2017, 14% of older women aged 65 plus in low and middle income countries were in the labor market. In sub-Saharan Africa, that figure can rise to 42% of older women. And these numbers are increasing. So there's a very basic, simple issue here that we have to make sure that that underpins all this, which is something that is really important to get across. It's very simple, but hard to get across, especially to policymakers, which is that older women work. And they work not just in the informal sector, not just, I should say, not just their unpaid caring roles, but they do work to earn an income as well. One of the other things that we found is that only around 1/5 of older women, or the facts are that 1/5 of older women have access to a pension. So, and 1/5 of older people have access to a pension. And older women are far less likely to access a pension due to the gendered roles of working patterns. These are issues that you're well familiar with about all the obstacles that women of all ages face that lead them in later life to not actually having access to full economic security. So in short, older women's economic contributions are being underreported. It's being undervalued, and the policy designed to address the gender inequalities that should be across a woman's life course are failing older women in particular. This is not just about the international scene and just not about international policy making, but this is about the local level. And interventions that are designed to tackle women's financial exclusion or increase their women's economic empowerment almost entirely exclude older women. We see a lack of understanding of older women in the way these policies are shaped and their needs, and they're not considered to be economic contributors. And and we see this even in research and data that's designed to capture the invisible work of women, that they rarely include older women, highlight the specific challenges. And one of the reasons for this is that we so often tend to use blanket categories when we are describing later life or older age. So if there is any information about a woman who is in later life, often we'll hear that described as women who are 60 plus or 65 plus. And of course, if you just use that as a blanket category, it obscures the huge diversity of experience that a woman will have, the difference between a woman who might be aged 60 or a woman who might be aged 85. And of course, the same is true for men. And that's a huge gap. And there are efforts to try to overcome that. And maybe Amal might even choose to touch on some of those in her comments. So some of our key findings. First, look, none of this is going to be hugely surprising to you. Older women are working in multiple roles, both unpaid and paid. And they're doing this mostly for their survival. It's not, we have to think of this in the context of low-income countries, middle-income countries, where many older women are living in extremely difficult circumstances and under extreme poverty. They are doing this not just for their survival, but also the survival of others around them. So most older women in the research told us that work is important to their lives and to their identities, and they want to continue working, they want to work, and they want to continue contributing, but they don't have the support they need. And they have the quantity of work, the volume of work they have to do, and the type of work they have to do, the conditions in which they're working are taking a huge toll on them. And there are many systemic issues that are underpinning this that really could be addressed, should be addressed. But we know that rather than them being recipients of care, many older women are the caregivers, and that their working conditions are arduous. The absence of their adult children, sometimes due to death, sometimes because of economic migration or because of humanitarian crises. We mentioned Ukraine earlier, and one thing I would point out, Ukraine is a situation that is the oldest humanitarian crisis we have seen because of the I think the figures are like 25% to 30% of the population of Ukraine is older. It's one of the oldest countries in Europe, and we are seeing, of course, those who are not able to leave the war are those who are older or those who are living with disabilities. So it's taking a particular toll on them. But one of the other things that's underpinning their situation is the fact that, look, they just don't have certain simple things like labor-saving equipment. When they have to take on paid working roles, they often have to work long distances to get there, or they have to do heavy tasks, such as washing clothes, farming, or carrying goods to sell in marketplaces. And this is all on top of long, hard working hours. One older woman in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, summarized her situation this way. I wake up at 6 a.m., I cook food for the children, send them to school, and I wash their clothes and dishes until 9 a.m. Then I get out of the home to earn money. There is no rest. In addition to the unpaid care work and paid, usually informal work that older women are doing, they also will often have specific roles in the community, often relating to ceremonies or to places of worship, and they have a huge obligation. They're duty-bound to maintain and to carry out these tasks as older women in their community. It's also really important to bear in mind that older women are likely to have multiple chronic health conditions which can be exacerbated by their work and their disabilities. And it's not infrequent that despite all these multiple roles and the arduous work they're carrying out, that these women might also be living with disability. And under ordinary circumstances, if you were living with these people, you would hope that you would be able to have adjustments to their work that would allow them to do this work more easily, but that's just not available. We found that the situation of COVID-19 has exacerbated all of this, and indeed, a study by another organization called WeGo showed that older informal workers had their livelihoods were particularly hit and were slower to recover. So one of the things we need to focus on and think about is what are some of the drivers underlying, what are reasons why women are carrying out this work? And I touched on a few of these already. First, necessity and duty. Older women are working because of their very survival, because they are primary carers for people who are relying on them, but they also see it as their role as older women to be the carer, as well as often they want to be providing financially for their families. But sometimes they live alone. And we mentioned widows earlier before this webinar started. And they might be living alone, and they might be supporting themselves. They might not have a family around them. And we assume that family is going to be the main source of support, but in most cases, financial support from families is irregular and unpredictable. Families cannot afford to support. The families in the research that we were doing were not in a position to support the older people in their lives due to their own economic constraints. But work can also be for positive reasons too. For example, remaining active, connected, and independent. Some of the older women we spoke to see it as shameful to be idle. They are working because it makes them feel useful, healthier, and it's a source of pride and self-respect. And it was clear from our research that older women have clear aspirations for their own lives and concrete ideas of what could improve the situation for themselves and others in the community. But there's a thin line between wanting to work and needing to work. Wanting to work and needing to work in order to appear productive, which society values. And so I'm not saying this very well, but what I'm trying to get at here is that sometimes that in order to get support from the community, it's really important that older women are seen as working. Some older women said that they were excluded from meals if they did not provide financially, even if they were living in a family setting, and even if they were providing unpaid care work in that context, they still had to do that extra bit in order to be given their fair share, their due. So it's clear that there are layers of intersectional discrimination at work here. Sexism and ageism interact within these power structures, relegating older women to particularly low status, both within the communities and sometimes in their families. And it's often forgotten, but it's so important that we recognize that these gender inequalities and gender roles continue into older age. Women, the unpaid care work that they do earlier in life continues in later life, and their work also continues to be undervalued, and they get paid lower wages, if they get paid at all. So there are accumulated inequalities, and these age-specific discriminations on top of the expectations really place a huge burden on them as older women. And it is to point out that, that there's a particular category of older women that are widows who face particular disadvantages and challenges, and that there are additional pressures when they also have the full responsibility for providing for children and others. So I want to just share a couple of examples of what older women told us about what drives older women's work. What one older woman told us, what one older man told us. So it is a must to work in order to survive. Life will be difficult if I'm not working for my own family, and they will be dispersed and fall into problems. So that's from the perspective of an older woman. And from the perspective of an older man in Ethiopia, that tradition forces women to complete household chores like cooking food, fetching water. So they know that it is their responsibility and complete them without any order from someone else. Accessing the formal support, including gender responsive. So part of what can help an older woman is, given the limited support, is having access to decent income and social protection. But gender responsive social protection is critical. If it were universal, no older woman would be in the position where she had to work for survival. But they're not accessing it at an adequate level. Traditionally, pensions in almost all countries are designed with male working patterns in mind. And when older woman does get to older age, they're not receiving the full amount of work, if they have access to a pension at all, that they should. In Ethiopia, there a couple of pension schemes, but they're mostly for public servants and private sector workers. 89% of those pensions go to men. And evidence shows us, but that it's hugely important to put in place this kind of income support. And social pensions, universal social pensions, we would call them, it's not the kind of income support that gives you all the money you need to survive, but they're hugely important. They've greatly contributed, evidence shows, greatly contributed to older women's economic empowerment. Even a small amount of regular income can make a huge difference. But we also hear some shocking examples. And from the research, we found out that in Malawi, there are even some older women who are being refused work or being obliged to do work for free, the same work that others are doing, being paid to do, because of their not being valued in the same way. They're being perceived as being secondary citizens in society. So these ingrained perceptions, expectations, and discrimination based on gender and age have a huge impact on the ability of older women to access their rights. So the impact of older women's not being able to access a secure income or decent work is threefold. First and foremost, it undermines older women's well-being and dignity. Older women have aspirations for themselves they are prevented from achieving. Many older women say they'd like to reduce the heavier work they do, or to focus their energies more on household or community roles, or have the capital to start their own business or petty trade on their own terms, but they just aren't being given the means to do this. And their role as carers, their financial exclusion, and the gender-based inequalities restrict the choices of work that they have and often drive them into doing unsuitable work. And the community's roles they have put extra pressure on them in terms of their own time and health. Their lack of access to a secure income and decent work also affects their ability to have a voice in the household and community decisions. Others say they can't afford to access healthcare or even to travel to receive it. And older widows have a higher risk of economic abuse, as women's worth is so often tied to their husband. I never received the cash when my husband dies. His relatives took all the money and even some property. I was forced to sign and they took it all away. This is a quote from an older woman living in Malawi. Secondly, the impact is on the ability to provide for their families. And we've discussed that younger generations of women and girls, for example, their ability to move forward in life depends on the support that they're getting from older women, but also from young boys as well, getting access to an education. And thirdly, look, this is having a knock-on effect on social cohesion. For example, if older women have less time to fulfill community roles they value, then sometimes older women are ashamed to attend family community events as they can't afford the gifts, or they're concerned that they'll be seen there to beg. And this is far from the reality that often we hear about social cohesion and communities working together, but it's also part of the realities that our research uncovered.
Ken, are you almost?
I am, and my
okay,
final
thanks.
slide. So my apologies for going to. Finally, I want to put all this into the context of a human rights framework. And this is hugely important because how to protect human rights, the rights in older age, is a massive gap in the international human rights framework. And this is why GARUP that has now over 400 members worldwide, are pushing for a convention on the rights of older persons. And having that legal framework in place is going to have a direct impact on articulating how older women's rights can be better protected. But just to be clear, what we mean by older women's economic rights is that older women are equally entitled to have a secure income and to work, that they are able to have free choice of employment, and also that they're able to have good conditions, favorable conditions of work. And this is shrined already in human rights. How this applies to women and men in later life is really important. And in practical terms, how that right gets manifested is through social protection. Economic rights also intersect with other rights, including the ability to participate fully in society and to be able to enjoy fully one's right to health and well-being. And the gap between what older women should expect in terms of the rights and what they're actually getting is huge. The inequalities they're experiencing are systemic, but this does not mean that they are inevitable. So I'll leave my talk there, but I'm hope to come back if there are any questions you might have later. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Neil, I'll get you to bring your slides up, and while I say a few words here. Thank you. As Soroptimist International just celebrated 100 years of as an organization, we do have a lot of older women in our membership. So I noticed some of the questions, what's an older woman? And you know, I like to think I'm still young and whatnot, but I think I'm in that category now. So it is a topic we need to care about. And thank you so much for your presentation. And there will be some questions, I'm sure. So Neil, the floor is yours. You can go ahead and start.
Greetings from Rodrigues. I'd like to locate for our viewers from where I am addressing you. The Republic of Mauritius comprises the following islands: mainland Mauritius, Rodrigues, Agadega, and the Chagos. I am addressing you from the tiny island of Rodrigues. It's indeed a matter of pride and privilege for me to be addressing as a panelist on this important event. Now, a few words on DIMA, Droit Humain, Océan Indien. DIMA Rodrigues is an offshoot of DIMA Mauritius. The inception of DIMA Rodrigues goes in line with the vision and mission of DIMA, that of developing a culture of human rights in the island of the Southwest Indian Ocean region. On the professional level, I'm currently employed in a program called the Fad Program, Fortify Learning Environment put up by the National Social Inclusion Foundation, which itself operates under the aegis of the Ministry of Social Integration, Social Security, and National Solidarity. One of the objectives of the FAD is to address specific and educational challenges faced by vulnerable children. On the social level, I do advocacy for the respect of the rights of older persons and for the advent of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. We do so on a voluntary basis, as we believe where there is a will, there is a way. We think challengers are best motivators with regards to human rights advocacy and campaign and intervene on two levels. Firstly, with secondary school students, and secondly, with all persons. The population of the Republic of Mauritius was estimated at 1,266,334 as of July 2021. This corresponds to a population growth rate of 0.03% since mid-2020. As at mid-2021, the female population outnumbered the male population by 13,980. There were 626,000 male and 640,157 female. The number of older persons 60 plus receiving old age pension is 277,000. Aging population. In 2021, there were 13,000 of people of 60 plus. It is predicted that in 2030, there will be 22.8% of old persons in Mauritius, and in 2050, there will be 29.6%. In 2021, the total amount of people 60 plus was 239,043. For 2031, there were 308 2,052 old people. And finally, in 2041, there will be 342,912 old people. Education and economic empowerment. To start with, I'd like to highlight the following points. Education in Mauritius is compulsory up to the age of 16 for both boys and girls. Education is free. Girls and boys have the same option of studies in the arts, in science, and in the humanities. Formal education and prominent positions. Men and women reach high positions in the public sector, otherwise called the government services. 39.7% of women are in the most senior positions as at December 2020. The number of men is higher than women in the positions of chief executive at the head of government ministries. In the private sector, there are far fewer women at the highest positions. As at December 2020, only 11.9% of women hold the highest positions. Economic empowerment. Generally, people retire at the age of 65 in all sectors. At retirement, they can opt to recycle or continue working in the same sector, but under another status. A woman laborer who is retired from formal employment is recruited by a private contractor to do the same job with a low salary. Other women are found harvesting vegetables or are seen selling vegetables at the marketplace. Adult education or campaign and lobby. The Ministry of Social Security has conducted adult literacy programs conducted by UNESCO. NGOs like GIMA have tailor-made specific training for older adults in human rights, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the justification for a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People. Campaign and lobby with the government to sign the African Union Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of older persons in Africa. I'm pleased to announce that Mauritius signed the protocol on the 14th of May 2021. Social work, how to make people own a program, a project, and activity. Adult education. The Ministry of Cooperative undertakes training in the launching and management of small and medium enterprises. It so happened that the majority of learners are women not in employment. However, very few who embark on such programs of older women. But it is worth the investment, as women should be able to be active in the economic process, as it is a known fact that the income of the women improves the quality of life in a household. They learn about viability, investment, and define what level of financial resources or seed money they need to start a business. Government policies and programs. Government enacted the Protection of Elderly Act in 2005. The object of the act is to set up a legal and administrative framework to ensure that adequate protection and assistance are made available to older persons in the Republic of Mauritius. The Act makes provision for a protection of elderly network to ensure the physical, psychological, emotional, social, and economic protection of elderly persons. The setting up of elderly watch committees in each district composed of older persons, officers of the Ministry of Social Security, and representatives of the police department to promote the welfare of elderly persons, hear cases of victimization, abuse, and violence in the family, and mediate to bring a solution and settle issues. And elderly protection unit with a function to organize public awareness on the right of older persons and the need to provide them assistance. Receive complaints from elderly persons who are in need of protection, apply to the court for a protection order where it's deemed necessary, assist in arranging for the admission of an elderly to a residential care home, ensure that every elderly watch and other appropriate bodies or authorities get proper feedback on the situation of elderly persons who could be in need of assistance. Government policies and programs. Old age non-contributory pension as from the age of 60. Carers allowance for older persons who need care for cause of ill health. Free health services in the public health sector. Free bus transport, and finally, legal assistance to older persons who can't afford the services of an attorney. Why an international convention for the right of older people? It will transform older people's lives by addressing issues of ageism, age discrimination. It will include cross-cutting human rights principles of which respect, dignity, and equality. Mandatory on government to conduct assessment and be accountable. The convention will prohibit all forms of discrimination on older age. It will have to make provisions for independent national monitoring bodies, which will include older people and civil society organizations. Once the convention is signed, ratified, and domesticated, the roles of each stakeholders will be clearly defined, that is, government, ministries, the National Human Rights Commission, the Senior Citizen Council, and civil society organizations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Sue, go ahead and bring up Ayushi's slides and I'll finish. That's so interesting, getting the diversity of the various countries and what the status is. So thank you so much for that. Ayushi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sharon. Greetings to everyone present. I'll just dive straight into my presentation. So the picture you see on this slide is that of my grandmother, my maternal grandmom, and she's in her mid-80s. We just celebrated her 85th birthday last August. She's had a long and fairly comfortable life, a good education, and the perk of some excellent jobs that come along with it. Overall, a very distinguished life. And now she lives on a pension. Her healthcare and other needs are taken care of by the state. And she's always looking for that extra opportunity to spoil us because she doesn't have enough places where she can spend her savings. Do her circumstances reek of privileges, especially in a country of a population of 1 billion and counting, where women of her age are often seen as a liability and treated with utmost humiliation by their families. India has no legal provisions for income security of the elderly, making the impacts of aging far harsher for those who are already economically vulnerable. As of 2017-18, less than 30% of the female older population in India is educated, as compared to about 10% around 1987 to 88. Child and youth literacy has always been high on the development agenda in India. However, illiteracy among older adults is also a pressing concern, as illiterate adults are more susceptible to ill health, exploitation, and human rights abuse. They are more likely to remain unemployed and earn lower wages. In India, the pace of population aging is not as rapid as in some other countries in the region like Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia, etc. By 2050, it is expected that these countries are likely to have 30% or above older persons in their population, while in India, this number is expected to hover around somewhere of 20%. During 2000 to 2050, the overall population of India will grow by 56%, while the population of 60 plus will grow by 326%. During the same period, the population of 80 plus will grow 700%, with a predominance of widowed and highly dependent, very old women. The number of older women compared to the number of older men will progressively increase with advancing ages from 60 through 80 years. Over the past 3 decades, the topic of women and aging has received considerable attention across the world. The fact that women live longer than men and with distinct needs has been recognized in several international plans of action and in many research documents. The United Nations has played a lead role in bringing together governments from most countries of the world with the aim of increasing awareness and advocacy towards creating effective national policies responses to population aging. One of the earliest recorded instances of modern state-assured age-linked pension is from a century and a half ago in Bismarck's Germany. Since then, nearly 100 countries across the world have implemented state-assured non-contributory pensions, that is, pensions that are not directly funded by the beneficiary. This has become one of the most prevalent modes of social protection today. While India too is one among these 100 countries, our policy intervention towards securing old age appear at best patchy. India is signatory to all the global conferences on aging as well as the regional plans of action, showing a clear commitment to addressing aging issues. The government of India brought out the National Policy on Older Persons in 1999, almost 3 years ahead of the Madrid Plan of Action. The National Social Assistance Program for the Poor is also an outcome of the directive principles of our constitutions, included in Articles 41 and 42, recognizing concurrent responsibility of the central as well as the state governments in this regard. The government also implements welfare schemes such as old age pensions, widow pension schemes through the Ministry of Rural Development, albeit with very limited reach. Increasing the meager pension amount and implementing easy and transparent disbursement process are also areas needing a lot of attention. In India, social pensions aren't a legal right like old age homes and geriatric care. For instance, one of the main legislations about security of the elderly in India, the Maintenance and Welfare of Senior Citizens Act, which is primarily focused on intergenerational care within the bounds of the family, mandate that children are legally obliged to care for their elderly parents and grandparents. But it does not highlight the role of the state as much as in securing old age. While grossly underprovided, healthcare and old age homes under the aegis of this act are indeed rights that the elderly can demand from the state. But there is as yet no legal provision that exists for income security of the elderly. Article 41 of the Indian Constitution advocates for the right of the elderly to income security, but at the same time, loopholes such as limited resources are a valid reason for the state not providing that security. As a proposed amendment to this act, which is expected to be enforced soon, some of these loopholes are proposed to be addressed. For example, the term maintenance as defined under the Act is proposed to be amended to include provisions for food, clothing, housing, safety and security, medical attendance, healthcare and treatment necessary for the parents and the elderly to lead a life of dignity. The proposed bill also seeks to remove the upper limit of Indian rupees 10,000 as the monthly maintenance amount. Earlier in the 2007 Act, the maximum limit was set at rupees 10,000 per month. If the amendment bill is passed and becomes a law, senior citizens might receive more than that amount. The amendment bill also says that children who abandon their parents, as defined by the bill, shall be sentenced to a prison term ranging between 3 and 6 months, and also a penalty of up to rupees 10,000 or both. Sorry. Income insecurity is a significant source of vulnerability among older women. More than 4 out of 5 women have either no personal income at all or very little income. Economic dependency among older women is therefore very high. 1/3 of older women do not own any assets, although more widowed women own assets compared to married women. Only 1/3 of widowed women receive social pension. Poverty drives over 10% of older women to work, largely in informal sectors with low wages, no retirement or post-work benefits. The relationship between economic well-being and marital status of the older population is also of interest because women are primarily dependent on their husbands for financial support. Losing a partner means that women are deprived of this source of support and will have to turn to their children or provide for themselves. A new care providing relationship with other relatives such as children, daughters-in-law, or siblings will have to be negotiated. In most of the Indian families, it is believed that the elderly women have nothing to do with financial matters. Reasons: they are illiterate, uneducated, they have no knowledge and experience of finance, banks, government schemes, and other financial instruments. While India has a national scheme, which is called the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme under the National Social Assistance Program, and multiple state-level schemes, the entitlements are insufficient. For people below the poverty line, the central government ensures rupees 200 for those above 60 years and rupees 500 per month for persons who are above 80 years. This scheme covers about 2.7 crore elderly people, or 24% of India's elderly population. However, minimum daily expenses in India can be capped at a minimum of rupees 800 per day, whereas the scheme is giving out rupees 200 and 500 in a month. And this minimum expenditure is used to cover basic costs for food, clothing, shelter, etc. The capital outlay for the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme in 2018 to 2019 is close to rupees 6,500 crores, a measly 0.04% of the GDP. When more than 70% of the population remains excluded from a social protection scheme, and the ones included are offered a measly sum of rupees 200 a month, the inadequacy of the safety net is self-evident. Relief lies in the fact that many states at their end add to this amount or run parallel schemes, enriching coverage or entitlement, or both. Moving on to a case study, Sulochana, who is a 69-year-old and is a widow, lives alone in a village in Nasik in the western part of India. Sorry. Because she has no sons, only 3 daughters, all of whom are married with their families in different districts of Maharashtra. She has been working as an unskilled laborer in a large cycle, excuse me, please, making factory work for many years, and is now thinking of retiring from work as her health has not been good for the last 1 year, and she is unable to put in the normal 8 to 10 hours of work every day. She asked for a part-time work schedule, but the company did not accept her request. There are many younger workers who are waiting in line to take her job when she can no longer work. Finally, Sulochana had to quit the job, but the factory had no obligation to give her any pension. They gave her rupees 5,000 as a one-time payment. With no other source of income and with her retirement benefit dwindling fast, Sulochana does not know what else to do and where else to go. She asked a few friends, but no one can help. She has now taken up 2 jobs as a maid in a nearby apartment complex, but her health condition is not allowing her. She has already received warnings that she will lose her jobs if she does not put in proper hours of work. So this is the condition of older women that we commonly see in India. Gender disparities exist at all ages, but when women become old, the consequences of engendered roles become more explicit. Poverty is inherently gendered in old age when older women are more likely to be widowed, living alone with no income and with fewer assets of their own and fully dependent on family for support. Surveys have shown that older women-headed households are poorer than older male-headed households. Much fewer older women accrue personal income or assets compared to older men, and financial dependency among older women is at a much higher level. Living alone is higher among older women than among older men. It is also more common for older women to live with their children or grandchildren, and they seem to better accept such realities of aging. Men and women age differently, as we all know, due to biological reasons, physical, hormonal, psychological, emotional responses, as well as societal practices, belief systems, discriminatory laws, and stereotypes that adversely affect women through their life course, all of which are largely rooted in patriarchal culture in which women live. Older women's socio-economic status is also rooted in gender division of labor, which assumes women's primary role in reproduction, unpaid household work, caregiving, and unequal power relations at home. These in turn restrict women's employment opportunities, mobility, education and skill building, independence, and dignity. Even when they participate in the labor market, most of them typically end up in low-paid, demanding jobs or relegated to part-time employment in unorganized sectors. Aging is often characterized both as a distinction, maturity, wisdom, and respect, and a disappointment as it tends to devalue social perceptions of older people, particularly older women, whose contributions towards society remain largely invisible. Others have questioned if aging is more a cause for celebration or a serious challenge. Gender stereotyping, namely social and economic roles that families and societies assign to women and men, often driven by culture passed on from one generation to another generation, is an example of one such challenge. Moving on to another case study of Sita Devi, who is an 85-year-old and lives in the Araria district of Bihar in the eastern parts of India with one of her daughters. She has 7 daughters and 2 sons, but none of them are willing to take care of her except the daughter with whom she is currently living, knowing well that her son-in-law is not happy with her staying with them. Her 2 sons are well settled, one in Delhi, the capital of India, as a daily wager, and the other in Araria. Her advancing age and failing health does not permit her to go out anywhere or do any work at home. With no savings of her own, she is fully dependent on her daughter's family. As she does not have a below poverty line card, she went to her village chief, who does not help in any way but demands rupees 200 to fill up the application form. Without a below poverty line card, she is not eligible for her social pension and hence feels and experiences many instances of indignity. But she is helpless and begs for help. To conclude, talking about the way forward, especially with regard to older women in the context of India, Creating a sturdy economic security framework for older women in India is an urgent need of the hour. Despite the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme policy being in existence since the 1990s, which is almost for more than 3 decades, the entitled amount isn't based on a formal logic but left to fiscal availability. In countries like Sweden and Bolivia, social pensions range from about 40 to 25% of per capita national income. Grassroots movements such as the Pension Parishad in India have been demanding social pensions to be raised to at least 50% of the nationally stipulated minimum wages. For now, the pertinent and non-negotiable step would be to at least adjust pension entitlement against inflation since 2007, which was the time since the last revision. Consistent inflation erodes purchasing value. INR 200 in 2007 should be equivalent to only INR 93 as of 2018. Annual indexing of pensions against inflation would ensure minimal protection against erosion of value. There are, of course, many networks, including NGOs, economists, and demographers who are working to raise awareness and its implications for the economy, particularly in relation to older women. As an attempt to foster an inclusive growth paradigm in the country, the government may work to encourage the private sector to utilize skills of the elderly persons, particularly women, and this may inter alia help them in cutting their labor costs and improving their competitive edge in the international markets. Thank you. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Ayushi. That was excellent. I just can't even imagine the staggering growth of the population that is in front of them, and it's already a challenging situation. Very, very good presentation. I'm going to move now to Amal. I know she doesn't have any slides, so I'll just put her up on a speaker view. And Amal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I want to thank Soroptimist International for inviting me today. It means a lot to me, and I'm not just saying this. There was a lot of negotiation with the concierge to keep the drilling sounds down so we can hear each other better today. And I also knew it would be such a challenge to speak after the panelists, because really they've said the story so nicely, so clearly from different parts of the world. But it's not a bad idea to repeat some of those messages before we wrap up and kind of get more into the discussion part. So this parallel event is very important, holding it on the sidelines of the Commission on the Status of Women, because for years we've seen that older women are often overlooked in discussions concerning women and gender. So this means so much more than any other intergovernmental context here in New York. So let's first have a reality check. Earlier this month, the executive director of UN Women said that we have the blueprint and the business case to support women's economic inclusion. What we need is political will to pursue it. To me, this term political will now holds a different meaning. Over the past 2 years, the world has been facing interconnected crises, the pandemic and the multiple waves of the coronavirus, the health crisis, the economic crisis resulting from the health crisis, and a social crisis around inclusion and equity. It's true that the magnitude and the pace of these crises vary across countries, but much like global aging, no country has been left untouched. Against this backdrop, we're witnessing the rapid unraveling of women's rights in several hotspots around the world. It broke my heart when I read in Al Jazeera that an 86-year-old Ukrainian woman was saying, "I was born in war and I will die in war." According to OCHA, she's one of hundreds of thousands of older women who need aid and protection on Ukraine's front line. They feel depressed, anxious, helpless, and lonely. Meanwhile, at a time when we are reading in the headlines that space tourism is now open to the public, women and girls in some parts of the world are facing setbacks to the exercise of their fundamental rights and are confronting daunting impediments to their access to education, health services, and employment. This is why the call for political will should be a call to embrace a rights-based, data-driven transformation of the public discourse on girls and women of all ages. And those last few words I borrowed from the independent expert on the rights of older persons, girls and women of all ages. So the flyer of today's event asks, how do we ensure a rights-based life course approach to women's economic empowerment and economic security? So in my experience from where we sit servicing member states here in New York, mostly through correcting misconceptions. That's how we do it. And I decided to highlight 4 main misconceptions that I often have to bring up. And actually, they mirror exactly what Ken and Niole and Ayushi, I hope you've inherited your grandmother's genes and strong constitutions. She looks fabulous. So happy birthday to her. So the first misconception is something that Ken brought up, that blanket category and how it obscures diversity within the older people group. So the first misconception is to recognize that older persons are not one homogeneous group. The Madrid Plan of Action said that over 20 years ago. And beyond the standard drop-down list that includes gender and disability, older people have been lumped together as members of that 60 plus or 65 plus in the work in the UN, and that we see at our level with member states. Intersecting forms of discrimination experienced by people at all stages of their lives, including gender and disability, are crucial to understand what old age looks like. And the cumulative effects of gender discrimination, as mentioned before, throughout the life course, are key impediments to attaining economic security in old age. So when we talk about older women and economic security, we're really talking about women across their life course, as the title brilliantly, captured that. So older women, for instance, face distinct needs and challenges. Owing to a number of factors, much of them mentioned already, unequal access to education, healthcare, income opportunities, and resources, women are most likely to experience poverty in older age than men. Legal coverage of pensions, for example, for women, which is at 64.1%, is lower than that of the total population, which largely reflects women's lower labor market participation rates and the disproportionate number of women in the informal employment, as well as shorter and interrupted work histories owing to, as we've heard, unpaid care responsibilities for children and other family members. According to a 2019 study conducted by the World Bank, in 190 economies, discriminatory laws continue to threaten women's work-life balance and career growth. When measuring formal law and regulations that govern women's abilities to work or own business, on average, women only have 3/4 of the legal rights afforded to men. Despite improvements in my part of the world, in Middle East and North Africa, women only have half the rights of men. The second misconception is that older women are a burden on the economy and on younger members of their families. Population aging is often depicted as a challenge to economic progress and to the sustainability of public expenditure, and older persons as an economic burden. We see that even as member states submit their voluntary national reviews. 2/3 of them mention older persons, but mostly within that framework still. So such analyses and viewpoints are rooted on a fixed image of what old age looks like, as well as on assumptions based on current labor force participation rates. In fact, modeling higher participation rates that are anticipated for older women, older persons and women suggests a possibility of a significant positive effect on current projections of economic growth. You don't hear that in the political deliberations in the UN. Here, we also need to have a reality check, as Ken had mentioned, on what the burden is and what it looks like. Too often, intergenerational discussions refer to dependency ratios. Demographers joining us today will know what I'm talking about. This perpetuates the stereotype of dependent older persons by equating them to dependent children as one and the same. Chronological age is often a poor proxy for the level of dependency for two reasons, to speak very briefly. First, older persons are quite diverse with respect to their economic activity, as we've clearly seen from examples from different parts of the world. And second of all, not all persons in the traditional working ages are active in the labor force, and some of them are dependent on their older parents. Also, in many parts of the world, socioeconomic and health challenges have forced many older women already living in difficult circumstances to take an added burden of caring for spouses, adult children, grandchildren, at a time when it is, the normal understanding that adult children look after their aging parents. That's why many member states talk about the role of the family, thinking that that is the case. Many older people find themselves with the unexpected responsibility of caring for frail children, or with the task of becoming sole parents or grandchildren, unsupported by the states. Third misconception: women's economic participation is the same as women's empowerment. Many older women continue to work unrecognized by performing unpaid care work. In addition, many are engaged in the informal economy, which continues to play a significant role in the global labor market. And I know Ken addressed this, but I want to dig into some global figures here. While it is more prevalent in developing country settings, the informal economy, informality exists in all countries, regardless of the level of socioeconomic development. So it's not a low-income developing country issue. Worldwide, 3 out of 4 older persons are in the informal economy. I'll say that again. Worldwide, 3 out of 4 older persons are in informal employment. Entrance into informal employment is often not by choice, as Ken said, but it's rather a result of a lack of opportunities in the formal economy and the absence of other means of livelihoods, owing to the non-existence or inadequacy of the benefits provided by pension systems, because of which older people have to work well into old age to sustain themselves and, as we've heard, to sustain their families as well. So when the share of informal employment of older persons is disaggregated by sex, the gender gap shows that older men have higher rates of informal employment than older women around the world, except in Africa and in the Arab states, where older women are more exposed to informal employment. Although informal jobs may often appear to be appealing, such as the opportunity to be employed closer to home, with greater flexibility, the economic need is often the strong driver for employment for women. So lower levels of less access to education, gender discriminatory laws, as we mentioned, traditional gender roles, compromised property rights, and discrimination based on gender or marital status regarding access to financial resources may limit older women's possibilities of working in the formal sector, particularly in low and low middle income countries. Against the backdrop of gender equalities, massive labor market disruptions caused by COVID-19, while affecting all categories of workers, have particularly affected informal workers. According to ILO, the gender gap in the proportion of informal workers in sectors that have been hit hard is far greater, with 42% of women working informally in those sectors at the onset of the crisis, compared to 32% of men. At the same time, the increased burden of unpaid care brought by the crisis affects women more than it affects men. And the final fourth misconception has to do with that there's an automatic win in intergenerational solidarity, or at least in deliberations on intergenerational solidarity at the UN in New York. And here I want to zoom into the discussion into the context of the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. If you have not read that, I encourage you to find it online and take a look at it. Member states have been engaging in discussions on the content of the Secretary General's Common Agenda. And from what I'm seeing, it differentiates between inter and intra-generational solidarity. Intra-generational solidarity is what they say deals with constituencies currently alive, including younger and older persons. And intergenerational solidarity deals with those who are currently alive and the generations yet to come. So there's a lot of discussion taking place now on duties for the future. And here, several misconceptions have to be, brought to the attention of member states. That first of all, there's a risk here when we present these topics to member states in such a manner, separating people between age groups, younger and older, and then separating them again between generations, current and future generations to come. We're setting people up, human beings, to be pitted against one another when member states discuss and debate and do trade-offs on these social and economic and health issues at the global level. So this is dangerous. This is has to be dealt with in a very cautious manner. And while member states might think that this is such a long-term thinking, we're thinking ahead to the future, in my view, it's pretty short-sighted, because they're thinking of the future of these unborn children. Those children, according to demographic projections, have a better chance than previous generations of living until advanced ages. So, prioritizing aging issues and issues of importance to older persons, including considerations for an international legal framework to cover for the original sin, as our colleague Craig Mkhayber would say, of age missing from the UN Declaration on Human Rights. That's key, not just for the current older population in the current generation, but for everybody else to come, because it's not a static picture, it's a dynamic picture. People grow. And that's why, Sharon, the life course approach, I think, will be more important now than ever if these discussions continue and start to take form. Right now, they're kind of just like ideas that are being bounced around with member states, because we're talking about the same human being. This girl that member states defend so fiercely, her rights, her education, it's the same person who's a woman during her reproductive life, and has her reproductive rights to be protected, is the exact same woman who's an older woman that suddenly dropped from the deliberations on the discussion in favor of unborn children who themselves will also be projected to grow into older ages. So, as you can see from these examples, then most of our work here is kind of removing these misconceptions. And that's why I think that the role that the advocates have to play, the role of the academics, and institutions that do research and bring out those numbers and those stories will be now more important than ever. I hope this is helpful, and I apologize for the repetition, but that repetition is good. It's a good sign that different people from their different workplace in different parts of the world are echoing the same message. And thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us and giving us your insight. I know Ayushi and I have had many conversations on this intergenerational and age, and we've worked together now for 2.5 years, and we have the conversation about, we don't feel a difference in our age. The difference is our lived experiences. So we don't even talk about age anymore because we see ourselves as equal with different experiences. So we've really enjoyed that conversation. So thank you so much. I love these webinars because you're always learning something new. And you made the current and future comment very relevant. I remember the first time aging came up for me at a parallel event at CSW in New York. They were talking, there was 3 professional women talking, and they were much older women. And they were telling a story of a woman who had been a university professor, and she was caregiving her husband, who was a victim of a stroke and was bedridden, and she could not physically manage him. But they made too much money to get help and not enough to hire somebody. So it was left to her, and she had evaluated every option in her intelligent mind and decided her best option was to end her life, because then her husband would be cared for by the state and she would not die caring for him. And that story was probably 12 years old. I still remember it vividly, thinking, what is the matter with our system, you know? And so that to me was really an important thing. I know I work in the area of, I always call it living the dream. I managed to merge my volunteer work and my paid work together somehow in my what was going to be retirement, to work on a coordinated community response for elder abuse in the province of British Columbia by working at the community level through networks. So we have 80 networks in the province responding to these issues and bringing them up through the ranks to government. So I feel that's a good system, and one that could be used widely. So Dee Dee, you were going to collect some questions. One that's coming up, and Amal, I think I'll give it to you, is what is the definition of older women? I mean, I see now it's younger olds, medium old, middle olds, and older olds or something. And it's like, can't we have something better?
Sorry, this unmute button, we've been using it for 2 years and I still have finding it. Thank you. I responded in the group chat when I saw that. That's a good question, and there is no official definition of older persons in the UN. Unlike youth, youth have a clear age when that group starts and ends. And there are many reasons for that. First of all, there are different ways of looking at age, and for different reasons with different implications. And that's why this issue gets quite complicated. I mean, traditionally, and I think the history came from after Second World War and something that related to pensions in some European countries, the common practice was to set it at 60 plus. And then some UN agencies go for 65 because now the figures for 60 plus are starting to look like what's viewed as a tsunami. So they kind of push it 5 years back to manage the numbers a little bit more. We don't deal with these figures. The experts that deal with these figures are in member states are the national statistical offices. And just like you have the Commission on the Status of Women, there's a commission on a statistical commission. And a few years ago, with big thanks to push from civil society and the UK government, a Titchfield City Group was set up. This is a group of voluntary national statistical offices around the world who are now working on exactly these things, Sharon. How to define older persons, what does age disaggregated data mean, aging related statistics, how do we standardize it, at the international level to be endorsed by the UN so that we can, improve data collection on this issue soon. And that's the last thing I'm going to say. I'm not going to give too much information on this, but very soon Titchfield will be releasing a document somewhere between the end of this year or early next year, I think, talking about the conceptual framework. And we've drafted, with the help of a consultant, a segment that talks about the definition of older persons. We don't have a clear answer to what that is, but at least we've put in enough information there to have member states get that conversation started. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I learned at CSOC-D, it's all about getting the definition established before you can really work on the issue. So, and there was the whole department that took care of that. I know in my work, they talk about, like, there's infants, and then there's adolescents and teenagers and young women. And then after 50, you're just old. It's just, that's just seems to be the way it is. So thank you very much. And I see Ken's got his hand up. So, and I'd also like, Ken, you to mention this important meeting coming up next month that we all need to be thinking about, and do a little groundwork in advance if we can. You're on mute there. Thank you.
There we go.
Very much, everyone.
So,
Thank you.
look, and the two things are closely linked. What I wanted to just add to what Umal has said is that this question of definition of being old, it's actually, there's a technical reason why we do need to have a proper definition, both at an international level as well as a national level. But the key thing is about we are defined not by ourselves, but by others in society. And so it's how we are treated. And being an older person might start at the age of 50, it might start at the age of 85. Some people, will never, in terms of their, if we want to define being old as having one's capacities diminish and reduce in kind of a more of a biological, technical way, they will never be old, because actually they are just as vital and active right until the end of their lives. So this links to this question of human rights, and it links to this meeting coming up, the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. It's the Open-Ended Working Group to strengthen the protection of the rights of older persons, which has been shortened to the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And the focus of this is where the General Assembly comes together in order to discuss precisely this: how can we better protect the rights of older persons? The key topic on the table right from the very beginning has been, shouldn't there be a UN convention? We've been doing this for 12 years. Amal is doing a fantastic job as part of the Secretariat of the UN behind this. But we now have to really kick into overdrive and make this happen, because we just have too many UN member states. We've lived through too many horrors and abuses that older women and men have experienced. And as Amal has said, this isn't about one generation. This is about social justice across all generations. And so the meeting is going to happen next week. In next month. In the week before April. I would encourage all people listening to this who have an interest in this to do two things. One is to go to the website of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GARAP, which is brilliantly co-hosting this with Soroptimist International. Go to their website to see the information that's there, become a member if you can. The second is, if you are an NGO that has legal status, when the time comes next year, accredit yourself to attend the Open-Ended Working Group. It doesn't mean you have to go, but what it does allow you to do is two things. It gives you voice, and it allows you to have an input in writing and to be there in person. And it also shows to the UN member states, this is an agenda that matters and that counts.
Thank you, because it's my understanding that the UN on its own can't bring this forward. The member states need to support it. And in the last few years, the political will of those member states has not been enough to bring it to the floor for a meaningful discussion. So that's the call to action. If you know anybody who knows anybody, you need to speak to them, speak to your member states, and encourage them to support this initiative. It's vital that it comes country by country by country. And that's what we're all about in these international NGO organizations. That is supposed to be what we're good at, is telling the story and making sure that they understand that there is voting will and political will to encourage them to suggest what we believe in goes forward up the ladder to where it needs to go. So that's the call to action from this meeting. And Dee Dee, did you notice any other questions in the chat?
Yes.
Oh, you've got two devices happening there. You're on mute now. We can't hear you.
In case you can't speak, there is one that just came in asking if Ayushi could speak to the intersection of caste-based discrimination and Islamophobia and how these intersect in the treatment and economic empowerment of older women in
Oh,
India.
I bet she can. She's scratching her chin.
There is a lot that I could say about this, and I could become politically incorrect if I were to, share my personal opinion on this matter. But India being the country that it is, and having the dimension in terms of religion and all other forms of diversities that we have, there is, of course, specific forms of discrimination that women face because of the religion that they practice. For example, each religion has their own system of, castigating women and, having customs imposed upon them so that they are made to feel, lesser to and unequal to the men of their family or society. Of course, we do see a lot of reports often splashed across our news channels and newspapers, where we are seeing Dalit women, that are women belonging to lower castes, or women belonging to minority religions being, discriminated against. For example, in India right now, a very simmering issue is a hijab ban, whereby, Karnataka, a southern state, has, banned the wearing of hijabs for female students in India in educational institutions. Of course, that has to do with younger women going to schools and educational institutions. But I think there are so many more such practices that don't even see the light of the day, that don't even come to public view because, they're practiced indoors. For example, we know about the practice of FGM, which is not very, because I've worked on the road to equality, I know how prevalent this practice is across the world, but very few people in India know how this is, how women in India have to undergo this. The Bora community have to undergo FGM. There are so many other practices which are, typical to religions. So we do have all of these issues. And then again, we have the Constitution of India, which tries to protect everyone and tries to provide equal, a fair chance to everyone in the country. But I think older women, particularly, as you said, Amrita, are far left behind, especially if they belong to, the lower castes or perceived lower castes, or to minority religions. So I think I could go on talking about that, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I'm just going to close the formal part of our meeting, and then we can continue the conversation. So I want to thank our panel today, Ken, all right, I'm not getting that name good, Nioli, and Ayushi and Amal. Great presentations, very thought-provoking and helpful. As NGOs around the world, we have the privilege of hearing these conversations, and it's so much easier to understand them when you get that diversity across the world and know the difference between privilege and those who don't have privilege, and rules and customs and laws and so on. It really makes a difference in helping us become outraged at these issues that aren't what they should be. So you've increased our knowledge and motivated us to do something about it. And I don't want anyone to forget the call to action about this open-ended working group needing to have our support. So thank you. And the slogan for GARUP is Age with Rights. And you'll notice that they have a lot of information on their website. You'll also notice our beautiful Soroptimist logo on their information because of our support for 2022 with their campaign. We will also be supporting the NGO working group on aging for October 1st, which is the International Day of Older Persons. And we are going to support their work on that day as the second part of the road to equality for the rights of older women. So thank you so much. And don't feel you have to leave. We'll continue the conversation, but I will end the formal part for those that need to escape because I know there's many other activities going on today. Thank you so much.